Good. I'll use names completely different from that list. Here's the news story. The notification came in while I was on my third cup of Dayquil lace tea, half conscious under a pile of fleece blankets with a true crime podcast playing to no one. I almost didn't look. It was a Saturday morning in late November, and I'd been down with bronchitis for 4 days. Not the dramatic, cinematic kind of sick where you look pale and interesting, the ugly kind. The kind where your voice sounds like a dying fax machine and your whole body feels like it got hit by a city bus that then reversed and hit you again. I'm a paralegal at a mid-sized firm in Columbus, Ohio. The kind of job that requires you to be precise, organized, and emotionally unavailable to chaos. And I had called in sick for the first time in 2 years. I turned off my work email, drawn the blinds, and fully committed to being miserable in peace. Then my phone screen lit up. A push notification from my credit union. Alert. A transaction of $1,340 and was made at Best Buy using account ending in 7719. I stared at it, my brain, soupy with fever and antihistamines, tried to make sense of it. I hadn't been to Best Buy. I hadn't been to Best Buy. I hadn't been anywhere. I'd barely been vertical. I opened the app. The screen loaded and I sat up so fast the blanket slid to the floor. $1,340 at Best Buy. $890 at a boutique sneaker store downtown called Soleil Society. $620 at a men's clothing shop I'd never heard of. $240 at a restaurant, a steakhouse, at 11:30 on a Friday night. And then smaller charges scattered like breadcrumbs. A gaming subscription. A rideshare trip across town. A convenience store ran at 2 in the morning, all in under 6 hours. The account balance read $4,211, where it should have read $11,700. Over $7,000 gone. I knew immediately. The way you know before you finish the thought. The way your stomach drops before your brain catches up. I knew the exact same way I'd known at 17 when I came home to find my college savings jar emptied on the kitchen counter, and my younger brother Caleb sitting on the couch like nothing had happened. I opened my purse. It was sitting on the end table where I always keep it when I'm homesick, close enough to reach my chapstick without standing up. I unzipped the inner pocket. My personal debit card was there. My work card. My health insurance card. The other one was gone. The one I kept tucked in the hidden back flap, behind a dry cleaning ticket I'd never used. The matte black debit card linked to the Holloway Family Trust account. The account I managed as the designated trustee. The one that was supposed to be used for exactly 2 purposes: verified educational expenses or a down payment on a primary residence for my brother, to be approved in writing by me only after he turned 25. He was 22. He had just blown through more than $7,000 on shoes and steakhouses. I put the phone down on the cushion. I breathed through my nose, which was not ideal given the bronchitis situation. The podcast was still going in the background, something about a con artist who had convinced an entire town he was a doctor. I turned it off. Then I picked the phone back up and called my mother. She answered on the second ring with the voice she uses when she already knows something is wrong and is pretending she doesn't. It's a very specific register, just slightly too cheerful, slightly too high. Meg, honey, how are you feeling? Is the bronchitis better? Meg, short for Megan. That's me. 29 years old, paralegal, trustee of the Holloway Family Trust established by my late grandfather Douglas Holloway, who spent 40 years building a modest real estate portfolio in central Ohio and died 3 years ago, having never once trusted my brother Caleb with so much as a checkbook. Mom, I said, someone used the trust card. Silence. That very specific half-second vacuum. What do you mean, used it? $7,000, Mom, in 6 hours, last night while I was asleep. Oh, Megan. Her voice shifted, not to concern, to damage control. I'd grown up listening to that shift. I knew it like I knew the sound of our old screen door. You know how Caleb gets sometimes. He's probably just, don't. Honey, where is he right now? Another pause. Longer this time. He mentioned he might stop by to check on you. He was worried. I almost laughed. I pressed my knuckle against my mouth and said, of course he was. 20 minutes later, I heard a key in my door. Caleb had a spare. I'd given it to him 8 months ago when he was going through what my mother called a rough patch, and what I called refusing to look for work for 11 months while borrowing money from anyone who'd sit still long enough. He needed somewhere to crash occasionally, she said. It would be temporary, she said. He still had the key. He came in carrying a bag from a deli down the street. Turkey and Swiss on a hoagie, my favorite. He was wearing a brand new pair of sneakers. Cream-colored, obviously expensive, the kind with the embossed logo on the heel that you see in Instagram ads, and a slate gray quarter zip I had never seen before. His whole energy was wrong. Loose and over-casual, like someone who learned how to act relaxed by watching other people do it. "Hey, you look terrible," he said with a grin. "Where did you get those shoes, Caleb?" The grin didn't disappear. It kind of froze. "Got a deal?" He set the deli bag on my kitchen counter and leaned against it, arms crossed. He hadn't looked me in the eye yet. "Been saving up." "Saving up from what?" "You haven't had a job since February?" "I had that thing with the landscaping crew. That was 9 months ago and it lasted 3 weeks." I set my phone down on the coffee table. Screen up. The banking app's still open. "I got the alerts, Caleb. All of them. Best Buy, Soul Society, dinner at Porter's Steakhouse at midnight, a bunch of other stuff. $7,400. Gone." He went very still. The loose, casual energy evaporated. "That's the trust account," I said. "The one Grandpa left. The one I'm the trustee of. The one you are not allowed to touch." I was going to pay it back. With what? "I've got plans, Meg. You have plans." I stood up, which was a mistake because my head immediately started spinning, but I steadied myself on the arm of the couch. "You snuck into my apartment in the middle of the night while I was sick and asleep, went through my purse, found the card I keep in a hidden pocket in the back, and spent 7 grand at a steakhouse and a sneaker store. And your defense is that you have plans." His face changed then. The caught-out embarrassment shifted into something uglier. The thing under it that my mother had spent 20 years carefully covering up with excuses. "It's my money," he said. "Grandpa left it for me. You're just holding it. It's in a trust, Caleb. Do you know what that means? Have you ever once actually read the document you signed when it was established? I was 19, you were 19, and you sat in a room with an attorney and my signature, and yours are both on a paper that says, in plain English, that this money belongs to a trust that I manage, and that you do not have access to it until you are 25, and only with my written approval, for education or housing. That's it. That is literally the only rule. You've got like 11,000 bucks in there for me, and you're acting like I robbed a bank. You did. That's what this is. You stole from me. I took what should have been mine. Get out." He stopped. "I'm not doing this with you right now," I said. My voice had gone very flat. I had bronchitis and a fever, and $7,000 of other people's money was currently sitting on my brother's feet in the form of very nice sneakers. "Leave the sandwich, get out of my apartment, and leave your key on the counter." Something in my tone got through to him. He'd expected tears, maybe. He'd expected the version of me who cries in parking lots after family dinners, and then calls him the next morning to make sure he's okay. He stared at me for a long moment, then put the key on the counter, grabbed his jacket, and left without saying anything else. I sat back down on the couch. The deli bag was still on the counter. I could smell the sandwich from where I was sitting. I picked up my phone and called Mr. Okafor. James Okafor had been my grandfather's estate attorney for 15 years. He was meticulous, quietly formidable, and spoke in the measured cadence of someone who had sat through too many family meltdowns to be shaken by any of them. He picked up despite it being a Saturday morning, which told me everything I needed to know about how seriously he took his fiduciary responsibilities. "Megan," he said, "what's happened?" "There's been an unauthorized withdrawal from the Holloway Trust. $7,400. My brother used the trust card without authorization." A beat of silence. Not surprise. More like the sound of something clicking into place. "How much remains?" "Just over 4,000. And you still have the primary account documents?" "Yes. Everything's in my filing cabinet at home." "Good." His voice had shifted to what I thought of as his deposition register. Precise, unreadable, already several steps ahead. Here's what I need you to do. Don't call Caleb or your mother again tonight. Report the card stolen to the credit union. Tell them you want a fraud investigation opened and a permanent freeze on the account. Do not tell them you know who did it. Call me back with the confirmation number. Mr. Okafor. I know, he said quietly. I'll call you Monday morning. Get some rest. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time after I hung up. My grandfather Douglas had not been a sentimental man. He was the kind of man who wore the same brand of white undershirt for 40 years, who kept every receipt in a shoebox organized by month, who said, "I love you," exactly once that I remember. And it was at my high school graduation, and he looked slightly startled he'd said it out loud. He built his real estate business the old-fashioned way, by showing up early, leaving late, and never once spending money on something he didn't need. He loved Caleb. That was never the question. But he was not fooled by him. I was 22 when Grandpa called me into his living room and told me he'd been diagnosed with a progressive heart condition and was getting his affairs in order. My mother was at the kitchen table behind us, very pointedly not listening. Caleb was not there. Caleb was, at the time, in Tampa on what he described as a networking trip, and what was actually a week at the beach with his friends, funded by a cash advance my mother had wired him. I'm leaving you the business documents and the account access, Grandpa said. Your mother will get the house to sell or keep as she sees fit, and for Caleb, I'm setting aside a trust. He told me the amount. My eyebrows went up. He saw them go up and nodded once, grimly. I know, it's more than he deserves right now. But maybe by 25, he'll be different. He didn't sound like he believed it. The important part is that you're the trustee, not your mother, not a bank, you, because you're the only one in this family who reads a document before signing it. He handed me the draft of the trust agreement. I read the whole thing, including Section 6, Clause D. I read it twice. Any withdrawal made by the beneficiary without the written approval of the trustee, or any withdrawal determined by the trustee to be fraudulent, unauthorized, or not in accordance with the stated purposes of this trust, shall result in immediate and permanent forfeiture of the entire remaining trust principal by the beneficiary. The forfeited principal shall be transferred in full to the Franklin County Historical Society as designated by the grantor. I looked up from the page. Grandpa, it's enforceable, he said. James drafted it. It's iron. This would take everything from him. If he steals from you, my grandfather said slowly, then he will have decided that on his own. He made me read that clause out loud at the trust signing. He made Caleb look up from his phone and listen. He made my mother put down her coffee. Then he made all three of us sign a separate acknowledgement form confirming we had heard and understood it. My mother thought it was theater. A scary story to keep Caleb in line. My grandfather was not interested in theater. The call from Mr. Okafor came Monday morning while I was back at work, sitting at my desk surrounded by deposition binders and still sounding like I had gravel in my lungs. I've reviewed the bank records, he said. The transactions are clear and unambiguous. He used a PIN, which means this will not read as a stolen card situation to the credit union. They'll likely rule it as authorized use, which makes our case simpler, not harder. It confirms he had the PIN. I gave it to him 2 years ago. My voice sounded terrible even to me. For emergencies. I told him it was only for if something happened to me and he needed to access funds for. I know. It's in your original letter of authorization, which I have on file. And I have your formal denial letter from last spring. He paused. You kept copies of everything, Megan. I'm a paralegal. Indeed. I could hear the faint dry approval in his voice. I need to schedule a meeting. Thursday afternoon, my office. I'll notify Caleb and your mother. Attendance is not optional. After I hung up, I sat at my desk for a moment. Around me, the office hummed. Phones, keyboards, the distant sound of someone arguing about a discovery timeline. Normal. Organized. Consequence-based. The world I lived in for 8 hours a day. The world my brother had never visited. I opened my bottom drawer and pulled out the accordion folder I kept locked with a small combination padlock. Paralegal habit. I kept personal documents organized the same way I kept case files. I flipped through the tabs. The trust agreement, tabbed at Clause D, the acknowledgement form with all 4 signatures. My formal written denial from 14 months ago when Caleb had emailed me asking if he could withdraw $3,000 to invest in a friend's food truck concept. My response had been a polite, professional no, with the relevant trust language quoted in full. I'd sent it certified mail and kept a receipt. There were also printed records of every conversation where my mother had pushed me to release funds. Texts, mostly. A few emails. Megan, he just needs a small boost. It's his money, technically. You know Grandpa would want you to be reasonable. He's your brother, not a client. 2 years of documentation. I had never planned to use it. I had kept it the way you keep a first aid kit, hoping you never need it, knowing you probably will. I organized everything into a clean manila folder, labeled it, and put it in my work bag. My mother beat me to Mr. Okafor's office. She was sitting in one of the chairs in the reception area when I arrived Thursday afternoon, wearing a blazer I recognized from her Facebook profile photo. Her realtor headshot pose, shoulders back, chin up, prepared to be reasonable. Caleb was slouched next to her in a chair that he'd angled slightly away from her, which I noted. They had clearly already argued. I said nothing. I sat across from them and waited. Mr. Okafor's office was everything my family was not. Quiet. Orderly. Every surface clear except what was meant to be there. He came in, shook my hand, and took his seat at the head of the table with the particular unhurried authority of a man who has done this exact thing many times and is no longer surprised by any of it. "Thank you for coming," he said, which was technically a courtesy but everyone in the room understood was not optional. He opened a folder. On the night of November 18th, $7,412 was withdrawn from the Holloway family trust account via the trust's debit card. Caleb, did you make these transactions? Caleb opened his mouth. Before you answer, Mr. Okafor said pleasantly, I should tell you that I have the complete transaction records, the store receipts which I've obtained copies of, and the PIN authorization letter from 2 years ago which specifies the exact and only conditions under which that PIN was to be used. Caleb closed his mouth. He was going to pay it back, my mother said. This is a family matter. Megan, you could just... Mrs. Holloway, Mr. Okafor said, I'm going to have to ask you to let me finish before you respond. This is not a family conversation. This is a legal proceeding regarding a breach of trust. My mother pressed her lips together. The blazer strategy was not working. Caleb, he said again, the transactions, yours, a long beat. Yeah. His voice was sullen. But I was going to put it back. With what income? Mr. Okafor asked. Nothing. I see. He turned a page. Megan, would you like to walk us through the trust language relevant to this situation? I opened my folder. I found the tabbed page without looking. Section 6, Clause D, I said. My voice was steady. I said my voice was steady. I had read this language 40 times in the past week. Any withdrawal made by the beneficiary without written trustee approval, or any withdrawal determined by the trustee to be fraudulent or unauthorized, results in immediate and permanent forfeiture of the entire remaining trust principal. The forfeited funds are transferred in full to the Franklin County Historical Society. My mother made a sound. That can't be right, she said. That was a scare tactic. Douglas put that in there to scare him into behaving, but you would never actually. Colleen. Mr. Okafor used my mother's first name very quietly. You signed an acknowledgement form confirming you had read and understood this clause. In this room. 3 years ago. I have the original. He turned the form around on the table and slid it toward her. I watched her look at her own signature. The clause has been triggered, he continued. As trustee, Megan has a fiduciary duty to execute the terms of the trust as written. She doesn't have the option to ignore this. If she did, she would herself be in breach of her legal obligations. She's choosing to do this, my mother said, but the conviction had gone out of her voice. She was staring at her signature. Mom. I waited until she looked at me. I didn't choose this. He did. In the same way that if you run a red light and get a ticket, the choice was made the moment you ran the light, not at the moment the officer writes it up. You could fight it. I won't. Caleb hadn't said anything in several minutes. He was looking at the table. Some of the sullenness had left his face, replaced by something quieter and worse. The look of someone doing math they don't like the answer to. The whole thing? He said finally. His voice came out younger than usual. The $4,000 that's left? Yes, Mr. Okafor said. Plus, the forfeiture applies retroactively to the principal as defined at the time the trust was established. The remaining balance transfers to the Historical Society. Grandpa really did that, Caleb said. It wasn't a question. Your grandfather, Mr. Okafor said, was an exceptionally precise man. Caleb sat back in his chair. He stared at the ceiling for a moment. I watched my mother reach for his arm and watched him shift slightly, not quite pulling away but not leaning in either. What about the 7,000? My mother tried. If he pays it back, if we pay it back, the clause has no reversal provision, I said. It's irrevocable. That's the word Grandpa used specifically. Mr. Okafor, isn't that right? Irrevocable, he confirmed. Your father used that word deliberately, Colleen. He asked me to make sure there was no mechanism to reverse it. He was specific. The room was quiet. I could hear traffic from the street 14 floors below. There's nothing to undo, I said. I'm not punishing you. I'm executing a legal document that he signed, that you both signed. I closed my folder. We're done here. I had known the meeting would not be the end of it. I had spent 4 years learning my family's operating patterns, and their operating pattern was escalation until the other person gave up. The texts started before I got to my car. Megan, please call me. We can work this out. He'll get a job, I promise. And then, 2 hours later, in a different register, I cannot believe you would do this to your own family. After everything I have sacrificed for you. And then Caleb, Meg. I know I messed up. I'm really sorry. Please just talk to Mom and tell her you'll reconsider. She's losing it. I turned notifications off for both of them and drove home. What came next was the part nobody warns you about. Not the legal process. I'd been prepared for that. The part where you have to keep existing in the aftermath of doing the right thing while the people you love are in pain because of it, and they've decided the pain is your fault. My mother left 6 voicemails in 4 days. I listened to exactly one of them, which began as an apology and had shifted by the 90-second mark into a fairly detailed accounting of everything she had ever done for me since birth. I deleted it and did not listen to the rest. Caleb was quieter. That was almost worse. A few texts, spaced out. I get why you did it. I just need some time. Then nothing for a week. Then Mom said you're moving. Is that true? I wasn't moving. I don't know where she got that. I did change my locks, which was a decision I made calmly and without drama on the Monday after the meeting, because my brother had used a key I'd given him to enter my home while I was asleep and take something from my purse. That seemed like sufficient reason. The real trouble came on a Wednesday afternoon, 11 days after the meeting. I was at work, at my desk, buried in a summary judgment brief, when my coworker Dana leaned over the partition between our desks. Megan, there's a woman in the lobby asking for you. She says she's your mother. I set down my pen. Tell her I'm in a meeting. I did. Dana had the expression of someone who had just been yelled at by a stranger and was being very professional about it. She said she'll wait. I pressed my fingertips to my forehead. Our office was on the 3rd floor of a professional building in downtown Columbus. My mother was a residential real estate agent who had, apparently, driven 45 minutes from the suburbs to make a scene in my workplace. I took the stairs. She was in the lobby near the elevator bank. She had not dressed for this. She was in jeans and a puffy vest, which meant she had come impulsively, which meant she was further gone than I'd calculated. When she saw me come around the corner, she moved toward me immediately. You can't keep ignoring me, she said. Not loudly. She had just enough self-awareness for that. Megan, we need to talk about this. Mom. I kept my voice low. The receptionist was very deliberately looking at her computer. You cannot come to my office. This is my job. And your brother's future is his life, Megan. The money is gone. It's done. It's been transferred. She faltered. Already? The day after the meeting. Mr. Okafor filed the paperwork that same afternoon. She stared at me. I watched something in her face go through several stages: the bargaining math, the realization that there was no version of this conversation that ended with a reversal, and then something older and sadder than manipulation: genuine grief. I thought he'd straighten out, she said. Her voice had lost its edge. I thought if he just had a little more time, a little more support. I know you did, Mom. He's a good person, Megan. I hope he is, I said. I genuinely hope he is. But being a good person and being someone who faces consequences for what they do, those have to go together. You can't have one without the other. You can love someone completely and still let them experience what they've built. She looked at me for a long moment. Something moved through her face that I didn't have a name for. He blames me, she said quietly. He told me this week. He said I told him it was fine to take it, and I did say that, Megan. I told him it was his money, and you'd get over it, and he should just... She stopped herself. I waited. I thought you'd get over it, she said again. That's the truth. I thought you'd be upset, and then you'd cool down, and we'd figure something out, and everything would go back to how it was. She looked up at me. That's how it always worked before. I know. She was quiet for a moment. Around us, the lobby hummed, the elevator arriving, someone badging through the security door, a phone ringing at the front desk. He's talking about going to stay with your Uncle Pete, she said. Pete was my father's brother, a no-nonsense man in western Pennsylvania who had grown up working on his family's farm and had approximately zero tolerance for the Holloway family's various dramas. Pete says he can help him find work. Construction? Maybe. That's good, I said, and I meant it. You're not gonna help fix this. There's nothing to fix, Mom. This is what it is. She looked at me for a moment longer. Then she nodded, once, slowly. Not agreement exactly. More like someone accepting a weather report they don't like. I'll go, she said. Okay. She walked to the exit. I watched her push through the glass door, watched her pause on the sidewalk and pull her vest tighter against the November cold, and then she was gone down the street and around the corner. I stood there for a moment in the lobby. The receptionist was still looking at her computer. I appreciated that. I took the stairs back up to my desk and finished the brief. My grandfather had a thing he said when I was learning to drive. We were in an empty parking lot on a Sunday morning, and I'd turned too sharp and gone up over a curb. And I was mortified and apologizing, and he said, "Stop apologizing to the curb. Figure out the turn." I thought about that a lot in the weeks after everything fell out. Caleb did go to Uncle Pete's. Last I heard, third hand, through a cousin. He was doing site work for a small contractor. Getting up early, eating dinner at a normal hour. Pete apparently made him open a savings account the first week and deposit a fixed percentage of every paycheck into it before he touched anything else. I hoped he was learning the turn. My mother and I didn't speak for 2 months. Then she texted me on a Thursday night, "I know I don't have any right to ask you things, but can I take you to lunch sometime?" Not to talk about Caleb, just to talk. I sat with that text for 3 days. Then I replied, "Yes, but not yet. I need a little more time." She said, "Okay." That was something. The Franklin County Historical Society sent me a letter 6 weeks after the funds were transferred. They were using the donation to restore a collection of 19th century land deeds and survey maps from central Ohio. The kind of documents that show you exactly how the land that became Columbus was parceled out, traded, built on. The kind of records that tell you where things came from. My grandfather had picked them deliberately. I was almost certain of it. Mr. Okafor took me out for coffee after everything was settled. He ordered black coffee. I ordered a latte, and he did not comment on this, which I respected. "Your grandfather would be satisfied," he said. "Not proud." Douglas wasn't a proud man. He was a satisfied man. He turned his coffee cup on the table. He didn't write that clause to punish Caleb, you know. He wrote it because he knew you would never enforce it unless the circumstances were completely unambiguous. He gave you a document that could only be triggered by a deliberate, irrefutable act. He made it as easy as possible for you. I looked at him. Easy. Easy to do what needed to be done, he said, without having to decide. The trust decided for you. He gave you permission, wrapped in law, to finally stop being the one who absorbs everything. I thought about that for the rest of the afternoon. I thought about it on the drive home, and while I made dinner, and while I sat at my kitchen table in the silence of an apartment that was, for the first time in years, simply mine. He gave you permission. My grandfather, the man who wore the same white undershirts for 40 years and kept every receipt and said, "I love you" exactly once and looked startled when he did, had, in his dry, precise, entirely unsentimental way, been looking out for me all along. I thought about the document, the clean, irrevocable language of it, the way it left no room for negotiation, no space for guilt to work its way in. And I thought that was the most loving thing anyone had ever done for me. People ask me sometimes if I feel guilty, and I have to sit with that question for a moment before I answer because I think they expect me to say no, to be some kind of triumphant person who walked away clean. The truth is messier than that. I feel something when I think about Caleb getting up at 5 in the morning for a construction job in western Pennsylvania. Not guilt exactly. Something closer to grief, maybe. Grief for the version of him that could have existed if someone, anyone, had handed him a consequence 10 years earlier instead of an excuse. He wasn't a bad person. I genuinely don't think he was. He was a person who had been so thoroughly protected from cause and effect that by 22, he had no idea how they were connected. That's not a character flaw you're born with. That's something that gets built, slowly, by the people around you, one small rescue at a time. My mother thought she was protecting him. I know that. She wasn't performing love, she felt it. She just confused love with insulation. She kept wrapping him in layers to keep him from feeling cold, and what she actually did was keep him from learning how to dress himself. What I've come to understand, sitting with all of this over the months since, is that consequences aren't cruel. They're just information. Every time Caleb did something that warranted a consequence and didn't receive one, he was handed false data about how the world worked. He built an entire internal map based on that data. And then he walked into a real situation using that false map, and he was completely lost. That's not punishment. That's just the inevitable result of the inputs. My grandfather understood that. He wasn't a philosopher. He was a man who wore the same undershirts for 40 years and balanced his checkbook by hand. But he knew, in the practical, unsentimental way of someone who had actually built something from nothing, that character doesn't come from being given things. It comes from being required to earn them. He tried to build that requirement into the only mechanism he had left, the document. What I've had to make peace with is that I was part of the system too. Every time I covered a bill, smoothed over a conflict, stayed quiet when I should have spoken, I was also handing Caleb false data. The trust clause didn't just protect the money. It protected me from continuing to be that person. It gave me a floor I couldn't fall through, a line I couldn't be guilted past. My grandfather knew I would need that because he knew me. He knew I would not enforce a consequence based on my own anger, but I would enforce a legal obligation. He built the clause for exactly that reason. The thing about integrity is that it doesn't announce itself. It just shows up, quietly, in the small choices. The document you file, the key you change, the voicemail you don't return. Megan kept the records. Megan read the clause twice. Megan did the thing that nobody would thank her for, and she did it anyway, because it was what the situation actually required. That's not heroism. That's just not looking away. I think about my grandfather's hands sometimes. Rough, careful, precise. The hands of someone who understood that the thing you build with your own effort is the only thing you actually keep. I hope Caleb is starting to understand that too. Somewhere in Pennsylvania, at 5 in the morning, with his hands doing real work for the first time. I hope he gets there. I really do.